Well, the government survived its vote on the Safety of Rwanda bill, but Conservative rebels are arming for fights in the new year. Rishi Sunak has travelled to Italy to share with its Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, their shared passion for Margaret Thatcher. Does Rishi resemble her in any way, except perhaps that Rwanda is as daft a policy as the poll tax? And while Mrs Thatcher warned that we might be swamped by immigrants, Rishi talks of Britons being overwhelmed. Meanwhile, Keir Starmer is maintaining a sympathetic stance towards Israel, whilst leading a party that is widely pro-Palestinian. An excellent political panel will provide its comments in a few moments. I'll reflect on the glamour of Hollywood in the 1950s and 1960s as I reveal the first instalment of my exclusive interview with the French actress and dancer Leslie Caron, star of Gigi, who shared her joie de vivre with me. Film historian Philip Kemp will also be on hand to pay tribute to her remarkable screen career. Jonathan Miller, the French correspondent at The Spectator, will join me to discuss what's happening across the Channel. I will ask whether, from the classroom to the street, young radicalised Muslims are in revolt against the values of France. A group did rebel after being shown in class a piece of Renaissance art that featured female nudity. Coming up later, Stefan Kyriazis will join me to review the latest shows to grace the London stage. There's the return of David Tennant to Shakespeare, and Tinseltown stars Woody Harrelson and Andy Serkis are on stage on the left bank of the Thames at Hammersmith. All of that to come. But first, your news headlines with Sam Francis.
Michael, thank you. Good morning. I'm Sam Francis in the GB Newsroom. The headlines at 11. There's growing pressure on Israel this morning, with David Cameron joining Germany's Foreign Affairs Minister in calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. In a joint article for the Sunday Times, the Foreign Secretary warns that too many civilians have been killed and that it's time for what he's called a sustainable ceasefire. The intervention is a significant shift in the government's tone on Israel's war against Hamas terrorists. However, Lord Cameron stopped short of calling for an immediate ceasefire. His comments come a day after Israel admitted it had mistakenly shot and killed 3 hostages as they attempted to flee captivity. Meanwhile, Israel's Prime Minister has suggested that fresh talks may be underway, aimed at securing the release of more hostages. Benjamin Netanyahu told reporters that the Gaza offensive had helped to lead the release of some hostages in November. Well, here in the UK, Rishi Sunak says that hostile states are to blame for Britain's migration crisis as he works to rally more support for what he's called radical measures to prevent illegal migration. The Prime Minister said opposing nations would drive people to our shores to destabilise the West, unless leaders crack down on small boat crossings. It comes after Rishi Sunak travelled to Rome to meet Italy's right-wing Prime Minister. He told Giorgia Meloni that growing migration numbers are overwhelming the ability of international governments to help those who need it most. And Labour has accused the government this morning of sending the NHS into colder months naked amid warnings of a winter crisis. The Shadow Health Secretary told GB News that part of the funding crisis facing the health system was due to excessive red tape, where Streetings promised that the Labour government would work to make GPs more accessible.
I'm just trying to send a message to everyone that the public finances are in a mess thanks to this shower of a government. Money is going to be tight, and we've got to make sure that every penny of taxpayers' money is well spent. And the argument on the NHS can't just be more money, it has to be reform and modernisation. Otherwise, I fear that our NHS, as it has been for 75 years, a public service free at the point of use, something I fundamentally believe in, will be at risk.
The man who led a rebellion against the government's Rwanda migration bill says an amendment could be on the way as soon as January. GB News presenter Camilla Tominey asked Marc Francois if his opposition to the Rwanda plan risked making the perfect enemy of the good. He insisted that the bill must be workable and that an amendment would bolster its effectiveness.
If the good doesn't work, then it's not good enough. It needs to be good enough. Now, on a positive note, Sybil Cash is already talking to government lawyers about trying to come up with an amendment that actually, if you like, would fill those holes. That would be a very positive thing too. If anybody can draft that amendment, it's Bill.
Yes.
So he and others are talking to the government in a positive way about trying to draft something to make sure that the bill is fit for purpose, and that amendment will be tabled in time for the committee stage, which is probably going to be in the second half of January.
Well, a teenager who disappeared 6 years ago has been reunited with his family here in the UK. Alex Batty was 11 when he went missing on holiday in Spain. It's thought he was taken by his mother and his grandfather, who are not his legal guardians, to live an alternative lifestyle abroad. He was found walking alone on a remote stretch of road in South France last week. And laws on drink spiking are to be modernised as calls grow for more action to protect women. More than 5,000 cases of needle and drink spiking were reported to police in England and Wales last year. There are now calls to make it a specific offence, with the government due to set out its plans this week. Well, earlier, Michael Kill, who represents over 100 nightclubs and live music venues, said the scale of the problem isn't really known.
This announcement has been hugely welcomed by the industry, particularly around the sort of categorisation, because the big thing that we're missing is the data. The data has been a huge shortcoming for this. And it's something that we've been working alongside government and key stakeholders like Stamp Out Spiking to try and get to this point. So very, very positive news to hear this yesterday.
Well, that's the latest from the GB Newsroom. For more, we're across the UK on your TV, on your radio and on your smart speaker. But now, though, more from Michael.
Many thanks to Sam Francis. Rishi Sunak is supposedly returning from a meeting with like-minded Conservatives in Italy to fire the starting gun on his party's general election campaign. I don't think so. January will bring him more hard pounding on the safety of veranda bill, during which the Conservatives are unlikely to look united or ready to campaign together. In Italy, the Prime Minister has warned that hostile states will drive people to our shores to destabilise Western nations. And he believes that growing numbers of illegal migrants will overwhelm our countries and our capacity to help those who need our help most. Keir Starmer, on the other hand, has come through a bruising autumn thanks to the war in Gaza, with much of his party unhappy that he wouldn't call for a ceasefire. Joining me now in the studio, former Labour MP for Rochdale's Simon Danchuk, Chief Political Correspondent for The Times, Aubrey Allegretti, and External Affairs Director at the Centre for Policy Studies, Emma Revel. Simon, I might just begin with you. One of the most important tasks for a leader of the Labour Party is to keep the Labour Party together. And I'm quite impressed by how Keir is doing that, having gone through a pretty tricky autumn. Am I right?
He has done reasonably well, though the vote that took place in terms of the ceasefire in Parliament, he lost a lot of support within the Parliamentary Labour Party. So it's very fragile. He's disciplined the party and managed the party better than, certainly better than Jeremy Corbyn ever did. So he's made progress, but over the Gaza issue is very vulnerable. And we now see that we've got David Cameron calling for a ceasefire, and I don't think Keir Starmer's yet called for a ceasefire, which is what he's been under pressure to do. So the Conservatives are ahead of him in that respect. And this is going to have an impact. Don't underestimate the impact it will have on a general election. We've got large swaths of Muslim voters who are unhappy with Labour, and that could dent his opportunities at a general election.
David Cameron's call for a ceasefire is qualified by all sorts of conditions that would precede it. Can you tell me, though, do you think that there is a more general unity problem in the Labour Party? I mean, would you bet that Labour unity is going to be an issue between now and the general election?
Oh, I think it will be, and particularly because the Middle East situation is not going to end anytime soon. So it's going to be rumbling away. The other point to remember as well, and it doesn't get much media attention, is the number of suspended Labour MPs that there are in the Parliamentary Labour Party. There are as many there as there are amongst the Conservatives. And so settling those issues between now and a general election will cause a flare-up of problems for Starmer as well.
Emma Revel, what do you think Rishi Sunak is up to, talking about hostile states sort of fanning illegal immigrants in our direction in order to destabilise us? I mean, first of all, do you think it's true, and has it always been true? But Does it bring any advantage to the Prime Minister to say this?
I think you can't disregard the potential of this happening, given that the scale of illegal migration is what it is. And if hostile states or any other actors look at how easy it is, relatively speaking, to cross the Channel, to get to the UK and then to stay here, you can't disregard the idea that someone out there is thinking, oh, well, actually, I can use this to my advantage. So I think it's definitely something worth highlighting.
European Union states have alleged this in particular cases.
Yeah, so we do have examples of this, and as I say, given the scale of the boat crossings in the Channel over the last 4 or 5 years, it seems silly to disregard the possibility that this is happening already. Never mind that it will happen in future if we don't get a grip on the scale of it. I think it helps Rishi with his base, and I think it helps solidify support within the Conservative Party for tackling this issue. I don't know how much it helps in terms of appealing to a wider voter base. I think there are some people who might be put off by this sort of rhetoric, but I think Rishi is probably hoping to solidify support with the people.
But why does it help? I mean, he's proving himself ineffective to control the boat crossings. Some people might say, well, because international law is terribly important, so we understand why he wants to aim off. But if you're saying, as he is, that hostile states are using this as a weapon against us, then what is his final excuse for not absolutely dealing with this? It seems to me that in a way it makes his problem worse, because whereas a lot of people have said, migration doesn't matter very much, or migration is good for us, and all these other things, what he's saying is, no, it is a weapon being used by our enemies, and I cannot stop it. Is that a good position to be in?
I think you're right to point out that it's particularly interesting for the Conservative Party to choose to focus so heavily on an issue that they have failed to control the entire time that they have been in government. Anyone who says, illegal migration has skyrocketed, it has done so under a Conservative government. So there are questions to be asked about how good an idea it is to keep pointing that out. But I think what it probably does do is anyone who is unsure about the steps that Rishi Sunak wants to take. This is an argument that he can make to go, look, you really have to side with me because of how critical the situation is. I think my guess would be that's what he's trying to do, to bring people who are potentially Conservative MPs who were wavering about the support of the supporting measures he wants to take to go, look, you really do need to back me or else.
Aubrey Allegretti, great to have someone with an Italian background on the show today. I suppose in a way what Rishi was doing in Italy was to try to internationalise the issue. So although, of course, we're no longer members of the European Union, it looks as if he is now taking the view that without international action, we're not going to make much progress. So he's hoping that Giorgia Meloni, who, of course, is within the European Union, can help him to begin an international movement to change the way either that the European Court of Human Rights operates or the way in which we observe its rulings.
I think that's absolutely right. And beyond the horizon, the sort of purpose of this meeting is to lay the groundwork for, I think, what Rishi Sunak wants, which is a far more totemic international agreement, particularly around the European Union table, in terms of how to deal with migration flows. Now, the reason that I think this is we have the European Political Community Summit that the UK is due to host next year. Rishi Sunak wants to put migration top of the agenda, and in order to do that, he needs key European allies like Meloni to be pushing it hard with him so that they can come to some sort of much more formal, radical agreement. He talked today about not being afraid to sort of tear up the international order and statute book. I think we're going to hear a lot more about that in the new year as he looks for ways to try and make this issue more of a sort of shared global problem than one that he sort of seems to be tackling, struggling, dealing with alone.
But I wonder also whether it bears the implication that he knows that the Rwanda policy is not going to work. Not work either because he won't get it through, or not work because eventually there won't be many migrants travelling, or even if there were quite a number of migrants travelling, that the numbers simply don't stack up to make a difference to the Channel crossings.
There's probably some truth in that. James Cleverly has certainly made it clear in the past that he doesn't see the Rwanda policy as some kind of silver bullet. And the longer the delay in implementing the policy, the less the deterrent effect is likely to be, i.e. you have seen small boat crossings come down by around a third, and that is partly due to the threat of the Rwanda policy, other things as well. But the more the sort of Rwanda policy recedes into the background, the more nervousness there is in government that those crossings might start to tick in a more upwards direction again come the new year. And of course, we're all just talking about illegal migration, but there is the sort of question of legal migration as well, and the government's presided over record highs, 1.3 billion in the last 2 years as well. So anything that the Conservative government wants to present in terms of dealing with illegal migration, it has to look like, with the tools it has, it can control what is within its control, i.e. legal migration as well.
Simon Dancher, whenever I have someone on the programme who's linked to the Labour Party, I ask this question. Do you believe that this migration issue is an issue that is destroying the established parties across Europe? And it may be the turn of the Conservative Party to be destroyed today, but the Labour Party needs to be careful, if it's going to be in government next, as I think it will be, that it's not destroyed by it too.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And what I've been saying over the last couple of weeks in relation to this issue really is that I could well see a small Labour majority at the next general election. At some stage that will implode because there's lots of left-wing Labour MPs in there. They won't be seen to be tackling illegal immigration because many of them believe in open borders, and I think we will then see a shift in the country to the right. This issue of immigration has moved up the agenda. It's to second place in the opinion polls, so it's becoming an increasingly important issue. Neither mainstream party appear to be tackling it effectively, and so I think we'll see a shift to the right, and perhaps that's where Nigel Farage starts to play a role, but this is after the next general election.
Emma Rebel, do you happen to see any likelihood that the Germanys and the Frances of this world will come round to something like the British position of thinking that we have to change the way that we operate with the European Court of Human Rights? I mean, one can see that, you know, there are European Union members like Hungary, possibly now the Netherlands, who are going to take a different attitude. But what really matters is Germany and France.
I think obviously France's position when it comes to illegal migration and the relationship that the UK has with France, obviously they are a player in this, and we obviously seek to put pressure on them to tackle illegal crossings on their side of the channel. So I think there are levers to be pulled there, and I think it depends a little bit how James Cleverly's relationship, now that he's Foreign Secretary, develops with his French counterparts, because his predecessors have had, not necessarily always the best relationship. So if there is a better relationship...
Emma, let me put this to you. If we happen to be in the position where, let's say, 60 to 100,000 migrants were leaving our shores each year for France, how strenuously do you think we would work to stop those migrants leaving Britain and going to France?
Well, that is the problem. Obviously, the French don't want them either, so they're not necessarily incentivised to stop them. I think the problem is that so many migrants are crossing through Europe and then into the UK that, different European countries have a different relationship with this. And if your relationship with migrants within your particular European country is very transigent, yes, they're coming, but they're not necessarily staying in your country, then you're not necessarily incentivised to deal with it. And I think that's why probably Rishi Sunak is targeting the Italians specifically, because they have so many landings from, Libya and other places. They're the most likely to be allied with him in the first instance.
Aubrey, I made this comparison with the poll tax, which you may know is sort of etched on my body in wounds. But there does seem to be a parallel because, at the time we knew the poll tax was a devastatingly bad policy, but we were kind of stuck with it. Well, we were stuck with it for as long as Margaret Thatcher was our leader, and then we were able to get rid of it. We introduced it and got rid of it in a single parliament, which is an extraordinary case. I just wonder, there can't be many people who believe that the Rwanda policy is going to work for all the reasons I gave a moment ago. Is there any chance that the Conservatives can end what Robert Jenrick called an act of self-harm and get rid of this bill, get off this policy?
In a word, no. Rishi Sunak, when he had Conservative MPs into breakfast last week, I was told by several of them, kept talking about this bill as being something that, or not this bill, but this plan as being something that he had inherited from his predecessors. He knows that it was sort of so part of showing that he wanted to deliver on Boris Johnson's legacy, which was a really important kind of point to make to Conservative MPs at that turning point in October when he took over last year. He's sort of saddled with it now, and they have to keep passing kind of ever increasingly strong immigration acts. We've been told there are 3 pieces of legislation that are going to make the Rwanda plan work, so I'm not surprised if the general public think that, or are less believing of that now they've been told it for a third time with this migration bill.
And Simon Danczuk, very, very briefly, I just heard you say in passing there that Labour would have a small majority. Why do you say a small majority?
Well, I think there'll be real mixed results because the Muslim vote and the issues around the Middle East and how that'll impact on Labour, reform coming up and challenging the Conservatives, and then the performance of individual MPs. So I don't think it'll be as clear-cut as we get closer to the election. Starmer will be challenged more in the media.
That's very interesting. I mean, I can't obviously imagine that the Muslim voters are going to go off and vote Conservative, so I'm not quite sure where they're going to go to. But I think that's an interesting topic to which we might return one day. So thank you to you, Simon Danczuk, and to Aubrey Allegretti and Emma Revel. Coming up, I'll share with you the first part of an exclusive interview that I filmed with Hollywood's French golden girl, Leslie Caron. And film historian Philip Kemp will be here in the studio to share the highlights of her dazzling career.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. If you remember what you experienced on Saturday, we'll probably have a very similar setup throughout Sunday as well. We've still got high pressure to the south of the UK, some very tightly spaced isobars across much of the UK, keeping things fairly windy and blustery. And this trailing weather front across western Scotland that is essentially stuck there. We've already seen 120 millimetres of rain build up through Saturday, and there's further rainfall to come, so do take care for flooding and even some landslides. Further towards the south and east, it will be drier, some sunnier spells developing for central eastern England to make the most of. A mild day for most of us, though, temperatures holding up around 11 to 12 degrees Celsius. As we head into this evening and overnight, the rain band will eventually push its way southwards, easing off for western Scotland, but it will then spread into Northern Ireland, northwest England, northern areas of Wales as well. Turning quite a damp night here. The far southeast of England holding on to some fairly dry conditions, still mild and cloudy here. Just something slightly fresher and brighter as we head into the early hours of the morning for northwest Scotland, some cooler conditions, and that will slowly push its way southwards as we head throughout the day. Elsewhere, it's going to be fairly grey, drab, damp, outbreaks of rain, particularly for western counties. Further towards the east, the rain will be lighter and patchy, but still quite blustery for England and Wales. Some brighter spells for Northern Ireland into central Scotland for the afternoon again, temperatures around 11 to 13 degrees Celsius. It remains rather unsettled throughout the rest of the week as well, so do stay up to date with the forecast. Bye-bye.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Very shortly, I'll be sharing the first part of an exclusive interview granted to me by that darling of Hollywood in the 1950s and 60s, the French actress and dancer Leslie Caron. A Parisienne by birth, Caron was brought to Hollywood MGM studios by Gene Kelly in 1950 to star as the ingénue in the biggest musical of 1951, An American in Paris. The war was over, the free world was returning to normality, and Hollywood was enchanted by the new ideal, the otherworldly sylph, embodied by European stars like Leslie Caron and Audrey Hepburn. Both women had trained as classical dancers and had emerged after years of suffering under Nazi occupation. Well, I'm joined now in the studio by film historian Philip Kemp to delve into Caron's career. Philip, welcome. Lovely to see you.
Thank you, Michael.
So,
see you too.
It's just possible that some people won't know about Leslie Caron. How would you summarise this career?
Well, I mean, it was an amazing career because she was, I think I'm right in saying, the first French female star in Hollywood. And it was her first film. In 1951, she'd never been on screen. I don't think she'd even been on stage. And apparently, because she was trained to be a ballet dancer with the Ballet de France, Gene Kelly came to Paris and saw her. I was enormously impressed. Wanted to speak to her then, but her parents had already taken her home. But when it came to casting American in Paris, MGM asked who he wanted, and he said, Leslie Caron. And they said, who the hell's that? But he came back to Paris, and by then she was 17, I think, or 16 or 17, and told her he wanted her to star in this film. And she'd never heard of Gene Kelly because, you know, she'd been in France during the war. And so she'd heard of Fred Astaire, but not Gene Kelly. But, and apparently, although you'd never believe it from looking at her on screen, she looked so confident, so composed. She was scared out of her wits right through the filming. She really thought, what is it she says, before then, I had never in my life spoken on the stage. Having to act out loud was a nightmare.
Oh, and by the way, she didn't speak English at that stage. I mean, she was having to pick up English.
Exactly, yes.
She didn't have English as a background language.
Yeah, I think she spoke a little English because her mother was actually born in America.
Yes.
Although her mother was French.
So, how did she dance with Gene Kelly? Did she hold her own with Gene Kelly in that first film?
Well, I would say so. I mean, you know, I'm not an expert on dancing, so I can't say for certain. But to me, she perfectly holds her own with Gene Kelly, even though he was well over twice her age and had been in, you know, dozens of films. But to me, it looks as though she's right up there with him, fully confident, lots of screen presence. It is an amazing performance. And the fact it was her first film, you know, at age 17, is scarcely believable. But this does seem to have been the case.
She's remembered mainly for Gigi.
I suppose. I mean, I remember her more for American in Paris.
Oh, do you? That's interesting.
Yes, I've always loved American in Paris. Well, I've always loved Leslie Caron. But, yes, Gigi, of course, was a huge hit. And she actually suggested Gigi, apparently, because she was a big fan of Colette's novels and had read that one. And by then, you know, this was 7 or 8 years later, when the studio said to her, what would you like to do next? She said, well, why don't we make a musical out of Gigi? I think there had been a film, but this would be the first time it had been turned into a full-scale, crash-bang American musical. And,
well, and Gigi, I mean, for those who don't know the story, is in a way quite risqué. Because Gigi is being trained to be a courtesan.
I know.
In the film, they rather modestly say that the women in this line are not made to be married. They're not made to be married, but this means she's being set up to be a courtesan.
What Chevalier says, thank you for little girls.
I mean, actually, when you watch that now, it's completely cringe-making. There is Maurice Chevalier surrounded by little girls saying thank you for little girls.
I know, absolutely, yeah. What's actually quite amusing is that even the film of American in Paris, there's an early scene, you probably remember, where she's dancing with a chair, and apparently the American censor thought this was overtly sexy and said it had to be toned down. And Caron was completely amazed. She said, mais qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire avec une chaise? What can anybody do with a chair? But nonetheless, they did tone it down, so maybe it's not quite so shocking as it had been. But yes, Gigi, very, very shocking for its time.
Nonetheless, it scooped the Oscars that year.
Yes, it did, yeah. Although not for her, oddly enough.
No.
She did win 2 Oscars, but... no, she was nominated for 2 Oscars, but Gigi and American in Paris, neither. Although I'd say she deserved Oscars for both of them, myself.
She danced a lot with Fred Astaire. Fred Astaire's dancing style very different from Gene Kelly's.
Oh, yes.
A man who appeared to move on air.
Yes.
But again, she completely held her own.
Oh, absolutely, yes. Apparently, I mean, she loved both Kelly and Astaire, got on very well with both of them, said they were very kind and helpful to her. But she had no trouble adjusting her style to that of Astaire, even though, as you say, it was so different to that of Gene Kelly. And she looks in perfect harmony right the way through both films, even though, as she said, at least in the first one, she was scared out of her wits.
One of the things she mentions to me in the interview is the precision. She was a very, very precise dancer.
Yes.
She hit the rhythm exactly.
Yes.
And, I mean, I'll leave it to emerge in the interview, but Fred Astaire did not think that all of his dance partners had quite that sense of precision.
I had heard that, yes, I know. So for a girl in her early 20s, that was such a compliment. Amazing, really. But she was so perfect, or seemed perfect on screen.
One of the extraordinary things about talking to her is to discuss her social set. I mean, for example, Christopher Isherwood was her intimate friend.
Yes.
I mean, that takes us back, obviously, to the 1920s. He goes to Berlin. He writes Mr. Norris Changes Trains, which becomes Cabaret. To think that he was absolutely part of her set.
Yes.
And it takes us through Jean Renoir and Rudolf Nureyev and so on.
Yes, and Louis Armstrong.
And Louis Armstrong.
Another friend of hers, yeah. Yeah, that's right, because she starred with Nureyev in Valentino. Although I think she found Nureyev a little bit difficult, but, she still liked him.
So, for people who have perhaps not yet appreciated the films of Leslie Caron, why would you suggest that we go back and look at her work?
Well, for me, always start at American in Paris because, knowing what we now know about how nervous she was, I think the fact that she could dance so beautifully and put across such an air of confidence is scarcely credible. And also, I mean, she didn't sing in that. They asked her to sing and she refused because she didn't think her voice was good enough. So she left all the singing to Kelly and her other co-stars. But her dancing, as I say, I'm not an expert on dancing, but to me, I can't see a single thing wrong with it. It's impeccable and it looks to me as good as Gene Kelly's, despite the difference in their age and experience.
And Gigi, although she's very elegant, she doesn't get to dance, but that is, I mean, still, I think, an extraordinarily charming film.
I think so,
One in which she absolutely steals the hearts of the public.
Totally, yeah. Well, I think that's the thing that I always loved about Leslie Caron was the sheer gamine charm of her. I mean, to me, Brigitte Bardot, OK, she was very beautiful, but a tiny bit, perhaps, I wouldn't say vulgar, but a little obvious, whereas Caron, there was a subtlety. And I loved that.
Many thanks indeed to Philip Kemps. I'll be back in a few minutes, and I hope that you won't miss the first part of my exclusive interview with the Hollywood legend, Leslie Caron.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new teeth. It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show, every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I had the privilege to sit down with the Hollywood legend Leslie Caron. In this first part of the interview, we discussed the origins of her career. Leslie Caron, tell me a little bit about your childhood, please, where you were born.
My grandparents were natural-born builders. They loved to build houses. It was very fashionable in the 20s and 30s. So they built an estate in the Pays Basque and a beautiful little villa in Neuilly, which is on the rich outskirts of Paris, by the river. And it was the grand life, like in the 19th century. Butler, cook, chauffeur, everybody had a private car, etc. I mean, and then we used to go in procession to the south of France, to the Pays Basque. And that's where I was born with my brother, Amory, who is now a scientist. And he does something quite remarkable. He lives in the Virgin Islands and tries to find the background of all those black people who came as slaves. And he finds where they come from. And I think that's so touching.
When were you first aware that you wanted to dance or to entertain?
Well, my mother used to be on the stage when she was a bit older than my father. And during a holiday, she came to Paris, La Grande Ville, and met my grandparents' family, who also loved La Grande Ville, gave lots of receptions, and so on and so forth. And she seduced my father, who was 5 years younger. My family disapproved enormously because she smoked, and she had shown her thighs on the stage. She'd been a dancer on Broadway, so that was a no-no. However, they had to lump it, and she married my father, and we were very happy.
When was it you first thought that you wanted to dance or to entertain?
Well, my mother never stopped talking about Pavlova and Nijinsky, les ballets russes. She talked about nothing but. She also taught herself French beautifully, was interested in French literature all the way to the Revolution. She said after that, it's a bore. And she also taught herself Russian.
What was your relationship like with your mother?
Well, she was more interested in books and playing bridge. She used to give me the money she earned at bridge to buy toe shoes during the war. Apart from that, she said children bored her. She said, when you're a star, I'll be there.
So is that why you became a star?
Of course. Of course. She found the best school for me. And she said, well, get on with it. I'm not going to come like those mothers every day and watch you, you know, just get on with it. And I did, and she'd come once a year, and she said, not quite good enough.
So when you became a star, did you regain your mother's affection, do you think?
She refused the first contract that was offered to me, because by then I was in Roland Petit's company. And that was very, very glamorous. It was the best company in Europe, maybe in the world in those days.
But she turned down the contract?
So she turned down the first contract. Second one was Gene Kelly, MGM, the leading part. So she said, okay, that'll be good. And she said, but you know, you've got to look at Fred Astaire. Fred Astaire has the best timing of any dancer. And when I met Fred Astaire and he wanted to work with me, I made a point of not telling him that as a little girl, my mother had said, watch Fred Astaire for timing. He's the best.
Let's go back a little in time. How was your lifestyle, your grand lifestyle, affected by the Nazi invasion of Paris?
No food, no heat, no water most of the day. There was electricity and water a certain time of the day. You had to quickly fill up. I remember going to bed completely dressed up except for the shoes. The coat, the scarf, the bonnet, everything. It was so cold during that first winter.
The Germans entered Paris. Drama, history. The day of Hitler's greatest triumph. The day when all the world except the British Empire thought it must be London next.
In Paris, it was desperately difficult. We ate fodder for animals. I remember the queues for everything. It became a way of life. The French became addicted to queuing. Even after the war was way over, it was a habit, even for the newspaper, until the government put out a law. Queuing is forbidden.
What was it like amongst French people during the Nazi occupation? How did you relate to each other? Did you...
Nasty.
Nasty?
Yes.
Why?
I think the French felt guilty. I think the French know they didn't have the courage to say no to the invader. They waited much too long to start preparations for the war. As soon as Hitler was building up roads and tanks, that's when you have to build up, if only to show that you're going to be ready in case. But the French, life was too good. And people were bitter with each other, rude. You couldn't ask the time of day. You couldn't ask how to get here and there, where such and such a street was. People wouldn't answer you. It was unbelievably hostile.
Were you aware of the Holocaust?
No. I did notice the stars on the left side.
That Jewish people were forced to wear?
Yes. And little by little, you saw less and less stars, people with stars. And then, finally, you saw none. And we had a dressmaker who was called Rosa. And she, of course, I suppose, was Jewish. And one day I said to my father, "Papa, why doesn't Rosa come and do our clothes anymore?" And he said, "Oh, she had a problem with her passport." That's all I was told. Us children took war as a joke. It was another game for us. We used to make nasty phone calls to people, taking a German accent. Then one day at ballet school, there was a girl with big numbers tattooed on her arm. And one day I said something in front of this girl, and she opened her sweater and showed us her arm. I never did that again.
You understood what it meant?
Yes. I think by then we knew what the numbers meant.
You've mentioned ballet school. When did you start ballet school?
I was about 11, very undernourished, skinny little shrimp. It was extremely hard. My mother said to my family, "Listen, if she's going to be a ballet dancer, she has to learn every day. You don't take that up once a week, like young ladies of good society do. You do it every day if you're going to be anything good."
Do you remember the liberation?
Oh boy, yes, I do. Amory and I, we said we were going out in the streets. Everybody was, millions of people in Paris, each one holding a bottle, kissing, hugging. It just was insanely joyous.
Who is here?
That is the great French dancer, Jean Babilé. So he was as good as Nijinsky. As a matter of fact, he danced most of the same parts and many others. He jumped and stayed up there for a bit.
Amazing.
Before coming down. He did this fabulous ballet, Le Jeune Homme et la Mort, Young Man and Death, which was such a success in London. He hung himself at the end of the ballet, and it was so dramatic. The room lifted, and you saw all the chimneys of Paris and the roofs of Paris. It was beautiful. And he walked like a dead man, you know. And when he hung himself, people held their breath.
Of course.
It looked so real. Thank God. He had a wood peg in the back that he held on to. But there was a rope there, and every night I thought, oh my God, he's going to miss it.
And hang himself for real, my goodness.
Yes.
What was your first starring role in Paris?
Well, immediately, Roland Petit, when he saw me, he came to the same class I was going to. That's one thing about ballet. Everybody goes to the same class. When you're a beginner, you stand in the back and try to do as good as the ones in the front. So I was in the same class, and one day there was this miraculous, godlike young man with, you know, attitude, grand attitude. And Madame kissed him and hugged him, and he was Roland Petit. And after the bar, he came to me, he said, "You, what's your name?" And I had decided to call myself Karonova, Russian name, because, of course, all the dancers my mother used to talk about were Russian. So I told the truth. I said, Leslie Caron. And he said, okay, come and see me in my office at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. I want you in my company. I came rushing home and said to my mother, she said, oh, good. And she said, you go there by yourself. So I went, and he hired me on the spot to do a little solo as a clown, dressed by Christian Dior. It was orange with puffed out thighs here in satin, glittered, and here was a sun, and in the back was a moon in tinsel. And so the number, the ballet was called 13 danses, 13 dances. And so I went through my little number. I did my 2 turns, and I had this to do, and I thought, oh God, I've ruined it. I wobbled. Gosh, I'd better go home. This is it. I've ruined the ballet. I've ruined Roland. And I nearly went, and I thought, well, the music is continuing. Maybe I'd better continue. So I finished the number. And then there was a thunder of applause. I couldn't understand this. Really, like rain was beating on the theatre. Oh, the first time I'd heard that. It was so thrilling. There we are. That was the first.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. If you remember what you experienced on Saturday, we'll probably have a very similar setup throughout Sunday as well. We've still got high pressure to the south of the UK, some very tightly spaced isobars across much of the UK, keeping things fairly windy and blustery. And this trailing weather front across western Scotland that is essentially stuck there. We've already seen 120 millimetres of rain build up through Saturday, and there's further rainfall to come, so do take care for flooding and even some landslides. Further towards the south and east, it will be drier, some sunnier spells developing for central eastern England to make the most of. A mild day for most of us though, temperatures holding up around 11 to 12 degrees Celsius. As we head into this evening and overnight, the rain band will eventually push its way southwards, easing off for western Scotland, but it will then spread into Northern Ireland, northwest England, northern areas of Wales as well. Turning quite a damp night here. The far southeast of England holding on to some fairly dry conditions, still mild and cloudy here. Just something slightly fresher and brighter as we head into the early hours of the morning for northwest Scotland. Some cooler conditions, and that will slowly push its way southwards as we head throughout the day. Elsewhere, it's going to be fairly grey, drab, damp, outbreaks of rain, particularly for western counties. Further towards the east, the rain will be lighter and patchy, but still quite blustery for England and Wales. Some brighter spells for Northern Ireland into central Scotland for the afternoon again. Temperatures around 11 to 13 degrees Celsius. It remains rather unsettled throughout the rest of the week as well, so do stay up to date with the forecast. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests, and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, welcome to this second hour of Sunday with Michael Portillo. Start your Sunday afternoon with arts, culture and good debate. Gary Lineker, the BBC's Match of the Day presenter, earlier this week signed an open letter criticising the government's Rwanda policy and used X, formerly known as Twitter, apparently to mock Tory MPs. I'll be joined by a top lawyer and former BBC executive to discuss what that tells us about the direction of the BBC and the authority of its management. Stefan Kyriazis will join me to review the latest shows to grace the London stage. David Tennant returns to Shakespeare. And those stars from Hollywood, Woody Harrelson and Andy Serkis, have travelled to Hammersmith to bring us a biting social satire. Jonathan Miller, French correspondent at The Spectator, will join me to discuss what's happening in French schools. Young Muslims objected to a Renaissance painting featuring nudity shown to them during a class. Does that attack the values of France? And with only 1 week until Christmas Eve, I'll be joined by that mover and shaker extraordinaire, Andrea Amoroso, founder of the Cocktail Lab, to share his special recipes for the upcoming festivities and New Year. All of that to come, but first, your news headlines with Sam Francis.
Michael, thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Sam Francis. The headlines at 12. There is growing pressure on Israel, with David Cameron joining Germany's Foreign Affairs Minister in calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. In a joint article for the Sunday Times, the Foreign Secretary has warned that too many civilians have been killed and that it's time for a sustainable ceasefire. The intervention is a significant shift in the government's tone on Israel's war against Hamas terrorists. However, Lord Cameron stopped short of calling for an immediate ceasefire. His comments come a day after Israel admitted it had mistakenly shot and killed 3 hostages as they attempted to flee captivity. Well, meanwhile, Israel's Prime Minister has suggested that fresh talks may be underway aimed at securing the release of more hostages. Benjamin Netanyahu told reporters that the Gaza offensive had been key to the release of hostages in November. Here in the UK, Rishi Sunak has said that hostile states are to blame for Britain's migration crisis as he works to rally more support for what he's called radical measures to prevent illegal migration. The Prime Minister said opposing nations would drive people to our shores in the UK and destabilise the West unless leaders crack down on small boat crossings. It comes after Rishi Sunak travelled to Rome to meet Italy's right-wing Prime Minister. He told Giorgia Meloni that growing migration numbers are overwhelming the ability for international governments to help those who need it most. The man who led a rebellion against the government's Rwanda migration bill has said that an amendment could be on its way as soon as January. GB News presenter Camilla Tominey asked Marc Francois if his opposition to the Rwanda plan risked making perfect the enemy of the good, but he insisted that the bill must be workable and that an amendment would bolster its effectiveness.
If the good doesn't work, then it's not good enough. It needs to be good enough. Now, on a positive note, Sybil Cash is already talking to government lawyers about trying to come up with an amendment that actually, if you like, would fill those holes. That would be a very positive thing too. If anybody can draft that amendment, it's Bill.
Yes.
So he and others are talking to the government in a positive way about trying to draft something to make sure that the bill is fit for purpose, and that amendment will be tabled in time for the committee stage, which is probably going to be in the second half of January.
Well, meanwhile, Labour has accused the government of sending the NHS into the colder months this winter naked amid warnings of a crisis in the NHS. The Shadow Health Secretary told GB News that part of the funding crisis facing the health system was due to excessive red tape. Wes Streeting promised that a Labour government would work to make GPs more accessible.
I'm just trying to send a message to everyone that the public finances are in a mess thanks to this shower of a government. Money is going to be tight, and we've got to make sure that every penny of taxpayers' money is well spent. And the argument on the NHS can't just be more money, it has to be reform and modernisation. Otherwise, I fear that our NHS, as it has been for 75 years, a public service free at the point of use, something I fundamentally believe in, will be at risk.
And a teenager who disappeared 6 years ago has been reunited with his family here in the UK. Alex Batty was 11 when he went missing on holiday in Spain. It's thought he was taken there by his mother and grandfather, who are not his legal guardians. They took him to live an alternative lifestyle abroad. He was found walking alone on a remote stretch of road in the south of France in the early hours of Wednesday morning. And laws on drink spiking are to be modernised as calls are growing for more action to protect women. More than 5,000 cases of needle and drink spiking were reported to police in England and Wales in 2022. There are now calls to make it a specific offence, with the government due to set out its plans this week. Michael Kill, who represents over 100 nightclubs and live music venues, says the scale of the problem isn't really known.
This announcement has been hugely welcomed by the industry, particularly around the sort of categorisation, because the big thing that we're missing is the data. The data has been a hugely a huge shortcoming for this, and it's something that we've been working alongside government and key stakeholders like Stamp Out Spiking to try and get to this point. So very, very positive news to hear this yesterday.
This is GB News. We're across the UK on your TV, in your car and on your radio and your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now, though, it's back to Michael.
Thank you very much, Sam Francis. Gary Lineker, who is the Match of the Day presenter, signed an open letter criticising the government's Rwanda policy and used X, which was formerly known as Twitter, to taunt Tory MPs. Mr Samir Shah, who is the incoming BBC chairman, told MPs that the former footballer's mockery of politicians was likely to have been in breach of the corporation's social media guidelines. They were brought in partly to prevent Lineker from becoming involved in another rumpus over voicing his political views, whilst continuing to occupy a prominent role at the BBC. Trevor Asserson is a British lawyer who's practising in Israel. He has considerable experience concerning complaints against the BBC. For years, he's been occupied arguing that the BBC's coverage of Israel is biased. Trevor Asserson joins me now from Tel Aviv. Trevor, welcome to GB News. To you, what does this latest development in the Gary Lineker saga tell you about the BBC?
Well, I think Gary Lineker exemplifies two particular problems that the BBC has. One is its essential abandonment, gradual erosion of its commitment to impartiality. And secondly is the weakness of its government, of its governing bodies, its chairman and its director general, to control the BBC itself. If I can explain that briefly, the BBC owes its reputation very substantially to the fact that it claims to provide accurate and impartial news. And as shoring up that reputation for impartiality, the influential and important people in the BBC have been subjected to social media guidelines, which effectively prevent them from breaking that rule on impartiality. So in particular, people who are not news journalists are expected to not to state biased views on particularly controversial issues. Gary Lineker clearly breached that rule. Now, you would think that an organisation like the BBC, given the importance of impartiality, it would come down on him and enforce the rules. What the BBC did, because they were so desperate to hang on to Gary Lineker as part of their programming, is they changed the rules and loosened them. And that, I think, is what brings me to the second point, is we've got the tail wagging the dog here. If the BBC responds in that way to a breach, then it indicates that the journalists are running the BBC. The BBC is not running the journalists.
But Trevor, it turns out that they did change the guidelines. Are you confident that Lineker is breaking the new guidelines? Because the BBC argument is that this is not a man who presents for the BBC either politics or news, and therefore that he is in a different category and he should be given much more leeway to express his political views.
Well, what I want to take issue with is the BBC's argument that somehow or other, because all he's involved in is giving commentary on football, and I don't say that lightly, I mean, it's obviously very important, but it's not news. Therefore, he's less important somehow, and therefore shouldn't have to be subjected to the same rules. That doesn't make any logical sense, because the reason he is perhaps one of the most influential people within the BBC, he has 10 million, close to 10 million followers on Twitter. He's approaching 10 million, I think. There will be very few people at the BBC that can boast that. And why is that? Because he followed his very successful career as a footballer with many years as the main presenter on the BBC of their main football programme, which is, of course, the biggest sport in the world. So he's been catapulted to importance by the BBC, and therefore his reputation is very much bound up with the BBC's, and it doesn't really make sense to therefore loosen their guidelines for their most influential people.
On the other hand, I'm slightly struck by the fact that, as I understand it, the audience for Match of the Day is around 2 million across the course of the programme. 2 million doesn't sound like an enormous number to me. I made a commercial when I was 8 years old, which was shown in the middle of Coronation Street. My first audience at the age of 8 was 15 million.
Well, that obviously says a lot about yourself as compared with Gary Lineker. But I still think that the real point is that don't look at the number of people watching the BBC so much as the number of people watching Gary Lineker. And 9 million followers is unquestionably a strong influencer by almost anybody's standards. And that's really why what he does and what he says is a reflection on an iconic figure within the BBC. He is very well known, for instance, for being paid more than anybody else in the BBC, and that's government money, effectively. And he's paid 8 times what the country thinks it's worth paying the Prime Minister. Gary Lineker's paid 8 times that. Because of his iconic position on the BBC. So to suggest that somehow the rules on impartiality should be relaxed for a person of that level of influence, to my mind, makes no sense whatsoever.
Thank you very much indeed, Trevor Asserson. Joining me now to discuss this further is a former BBC executive, Roger Bolton, who's going to share his thoughts on the Gary Lineker conundrum. Roger, very good to speak to you. Welcome to BBC News. I hope you may have had the chance. Welcome to GB News. I hope you may have had the chance of hearing that interview just then. I wonder what you think the Gary Lineker debacle, if I can call it that, tells us about the direction of the BBC and the control of its management.
Well, can I tell you what I thought about that interview from the gentleman in Israel? I mean, it was ludicrous. Large sections of it were ludicrous. I'm not employed by the BBC. I've been highly critical of them. I run a podcast which is examines what they say. But to suggest the BBC has abandoned impartiality is entirely wrong. Now, they may not be sufficiently good at it, but to suggest they've abandoned it is ridiculous. They work hard at it, but it's such a difficult concept. And it's quite right that the new chair, if he's confirmed, and others, should focus on this. It's vital to the BBC's reputation. It's also true BBC gets it wrong occasionally. But to suggest they're abandoning it is absolutely crackers. And then when you look at the description he put forward of the guidelines on impartiality, I mean, it doesn't recognise there's a real issue here. There's something you do obviously believe in, which is freedom of speech on the one hand, against the responsibility to be impartial because you are a broadcaster which gets money from the licence fee, not, by the way, government money, which again was said before. So, there are two areas of this. Anybody working for news and current affairs, no, you don't tweet, you don't say anything, you don't sign letters, whatever. other hand, people like you who've done great railway journalism and whatever, it'd be ludicrous to say to you that because you work for the BBC in doing such programmes, you shouldn't be able to say what you think. And then you get this middle ground of people, actually freelancers. Gary Lineker works for other people, but who are seen to present very important programmes. That's where the guidelines get difficult. And my reading of the situation is that Gary Lineker, in signing the letter he did not break the guidelines. But in the tweets that followed, he did break them. Now, big question is, what do you do? The last time the BBC tried to discipline him, give him a yellow card on this, large number of his supporters refused to take his place and refused to appear in programmes. My own view is that, yes, he's broken them. He should actually, the BBC and Gary Lineker should come to a parting of ways. Sadly, he's a good guy. He believes in what he's saying, but he shouldn't do this. And he's putting the BBC into a difficult position time and time again. But to say that there aren't people at the BBC who are committed to impartiality and genuinely agonising with this issue is crazy.
In defence of Trevor, what I heard Trevor say, amongst other things, certainly, was that Gary Lineker had been provided with his platform because of all the fame that has come to him from being a BBC employee. And therefore, I think Trevor's argument was, you can't just simply say that because he's not presenting politics or the news, he's free to say whatever he wants. He's saying whatever he wants on the basis that he has achieved that fame thanks to the BBC. Was there something in that point?
Not a lot. He achieved his fame because he was a brilliant centre-forward and scored a large number of goals for England. He's also a very good presenter who's worked elsewhere. But of course, yes, it does help him and his prominence that he presents Match of the Day, or he's a successful businessman in other ways. No, I mean, the BBC doesn't say he can say what he likes. It's trying to draw guidelines, and between this sort of two icebergs, really, or Scylla and Charybdis, if you like, between, on the one hand, freedom of expression and the right of people like you, and you, as I've made the point about you appearing, say what they like, and the need for the BBC to be impartial and to be seen as impartial, particularly in its news, current affairs input. In this middle ground, it's difficult. My view is that Gary Lineker is putting himself first before the BBC, and it would be very helpful now if he shut up. And if he won't shut up, I think there should be a parting of the ways. I actually think that probably next season, Match of the Day will not be presented by Gary Lineker. But by the way, what you mentioned about the drop in audiences, that's a reflection of what is happening generally in the industry, where very few programmes outside the Queen's funeral or the coronation or Strictly Come Dancing will ever get into sort of 12 million or something like that. People are watching offline, and this is, again, this mammoth problem for the BBC to deal with.
Roger Bolton, thank you very much. A very nuanced view there on the Gary Lineker situation. Coming up, Stefan Kyriazis will be here to review what's being presented this Christmas on the London stage.
Hello there, good afternoon. I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. It's quite a windy day out there for many of us. We've seen gusts of 50 to 60 miles per hour in places, so do take care because some travel disruption is possible. The persistent rain that we have seen across western Scotland this weekend is slowly going to be easing out as we head into this evening and overnight, but it does mean it's going to be pushing its way southwards into Northern Ireland, northwest England, western Wales. Quite a damp night here. Far southeast of England holding on to some drier conditions, but still fairly mild and cloudy here. Temperatures for most of us holding up between 9 and 11 degrees Celsius. As we head into Monday, then, it's looking like quite a grey, drab, damp day for the vast majority of us. Particularly western areas will see outbreaks of rain. Further towards the east, it will be slightly lighter and patchier. And actually some brighter conditions should push their way into Scotland and Northern Ireland as we head into the afternoon. The winds will ease down here a touch, but further showers pushing into the far northwest of Scotland later on as well. Temperatures again fairly above average for the time of year, ranging between 10 and 13 degrees Celsius. Into Tuesday, we've got this next set of fronts that are going to start pushing their way in across the south of the UK, and so it's England and Wales that are going to bear the brunt of the rainfall as we head into the day here. Quite a wet rush hour period to start off the day. Quite a lot of spray on roads is certainly possible. It will still be very blustery as all of this rain pushes its way off. Some brighter spells for Scotland, Northern Ireland, still with a scattering of showers, though some of those will be wintry over the higher ground, and it's that theme of showers that will persist as we head throughout the rest of the week. Bye-bye.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6 is Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's on your teeth.
It's on your teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Stefan Kyriazis joins me now. And Stefan, you've been to the theatre as usual. You've been quite busy, I believe. What would you like to start with?
Well, by the pricking of my thumbs, Michael.
Macbeth.
Let me tell you something astonishing this way comes. So we're in this big Shakespeare anniversary. We've had Branagh's Lear, which didn't work, and Ralph Fiennes is currently doing his Macbeth, touring the country before it comes to London. Now we've got David Tennant. This is at the Donmar until February the 10th, and this introduces binaural technology. So we went in, and first time I've ever experienced this, headphones. They're wired to our seats. We do sound tests and everything, and they've properly calibrated so they ping between your ears and around the back of your head almost, so the sound. This is fully immersive, and you'll see from some of the pictures, a very blank stage. It's a white square blank stage with a huge glass-panelled wall behind. And what this does is, I have a bit of a problem sometimes with Shakespeare being declaimed. You know, they have to deliver the lines to you. And this is a problem, especially for asides or muttering or conniving, or also a lot of Shakespeare's interior thoughts.
Yes, particularly Macbeth.
Particularly Macbeth, and then Lady Macbeth. So you have this incredible thing where they can absolutely mutter and murmur to themselves, sometimes with other people on stage. You're hearing their thoughts. It's incredible. And sometimes, I'm not a big fan of slow-mos, but at a big feast, Everybody goes into slow motion at the dinner table, and again we go into his head while he's plotting or panicking and then come back out of it. We don't see the witches the first time. We just hear these eldritch voices, and they're kind of circling around us. It's extraordinary. And then the second time with the witches, again, it's not 3 women, it's a lot of the supporting cast. Filled with mist, lights go red, and then all these bodies writhe around Macbeth, coming up at him, and each one delivers one line. So constantly, we have this feeling of voices from the air, spirit, something pagan, something watching and manipulating. It's eerie, it's spine-tingling, it's hugely immersive. It's an hour and 50 with no interval, which normally would absolutely horrify me. I got to, they're starting to sort of, the woods are coming to Dunsinane and all the rest of this. And I was like, is it nearly over? Absolutely, it's gripping.
So this was a complete success to you?
It's a massive success. And also, most of the time, a lot of the actors are not on stage. They're behind this glass panel, almost like the walls we have here. It's a modernist costume, so black polo necks or grey polo necks, kilts and boots. And you can often just see these line of floating heads. And often they're saying their lines, you can't see who's saying them, so it's just coming from there. But they act like almost judges, again, the world looking down and judging.
Could anybody complain that they could not hear, do you think?
No, not at all. It's so, but they can also, if you have issues, they can lower the volume, but it's not crazy loud. It's crystal clear. 4 of the performers towards the end, a stunning vocalist, pipes, a violin, almost an accordion. Sound effects. Cush Jumbo as Lady Macbeth is magnificent. She brings everything I wanted from a Lady Macbeth. Absolutely glorious.
And what about David Tennant's Macbeth?
He's wonderful. So he's always got this kind of boyish energy, but he's always had that ability as well to flip, and you can almost, there's a little bit of menace underneath. There's something unsettling sometimes to his energy. So he's very good at that unravel. And there's more and more belief that, you know, this is a play also about PTSD, experiences of war, and then PTSD for guilt and actions. And so you get that from him.
This Macbeth at the Donmar may be very difficult to get tickets.
Yes.
But I think you're making a broader point here that you may have seen the future, or a part of the future of London theatre.
And I'm excited because people like Mark Rylance have been very loudly condemning the use of mics. He wants natural voices. I think there's a place for both. And then we go to our next show,
please,
which is an absolutely opposite. They threw everything at this. This is Stranger Things, the TV show. It's the biggest show in the world. There's like almost 1 billion hours viewed this year alone of the show. It's immense. This show is 3 hours. They've thrown the most unbelievable special effects, things you just are not used to seeing yet on stage. Stephen Daldry knows what he's doing with space and productions. He's taken it as his baby. So the Duffer Brothers created the show. Stephen Daldry has created this theatre production, and it's a prequel to the TV show, which is set from 1983. This takes us back to 1959. So we see the Winona Ryder and David Harbour characters, Joyce and Hopper, as high school kids. But for people that haven't seen, Series 4 introduces us to the main villain. In this, we get his genesis story when he's still a young boy. So if you haven't seen the show, which is important, which people won't have, this is a villain genesis story. It's a young, troubled boy poised between light and dark, and it works beautifully as that. If you have, and most will have seen the show, rammed with Easter eggs, you see the Upside Down, which is this alternate world brought to life in front of you. The opening 10 minutes is a bit like the Manhattan Project, I think, where they tried to make a battleship invisible. You have a prow of a battleship looming at you from the stage. I don't know about the people in front of me. We were about halfway in the stalls. The stalls were filled with smoke and lights and mist. All the lights were flickering around us, screams, gunfire. A Demogorgon, if you like, screamed at us from the balcony. And this was just the opening. And then you get that synth music, which is the theme tune, the red neon strips around it, around the stage. And the crowd was already adrenalized. They went nuts. This is immersive. This is almost kind of like a cult thing. It's incredible.
What an extraordinary week. Where is this? Any chance of tickets?
Yes. Well, this is on at the Phoenix Theatre. And this, at the moment, is booking through until August next year.
Okay.
So this is a major event, and this will be a global event. People will be coming to see this show from around the world. It's incredible as an experience.
And then you and I went to see Ulster American.
Yes.
Tell us a bit about that.
So this is Woody Harrelson, first time back on the London stage for 18 years. And he is playing an Oscar-winning Hollywood star. very much a little bit similar to what we think of his persona. Yoga pants, he's drinking lots of funny herbal teas, he does a few little yoga poses, and he's very in touch with his feminine side, with his liberal side. And he's come across, he's a proud, that phenomenon in America, a Catholic Irish American. And he's very proud of this heritage. And he thinks he's come across to make a play about the Troubles. And when he gets over, at first, it's all about virtue signalling and how excited he is. And then when he is with Andy Serkis, who plays the play's director, they sort of do this trade-off of who's the most liberal, who's the most woke, who's the most whatever. And it's ludicrous until Harrelson starts introducing very difficult themes. So the N-word and
rape,
yes. And hypothetically, would you, and in what scenario would, and who would you? And the audience is just sat there staggered, as is Andy Serkis.
Staggered, but also, I mean, it's extraordinarily funny.
Yes.
I mean, the audience, when I went, was roaring with laughter. Yeah. Then enter the playwright, who is actually an Ulster Protestant, and she's written about the Troubles from a different point of view. And played by Louisa Harland, who to me stole the show. I thought it was amazing.
I absolutely agree. I thought Harrelson surprised me. Mastery of physical comedy. He is absolutely hilarious. And again, underneath, when his distasteful underneath is slowly revealed, superb at that. I thought Serkis was a little bit uneven. Louisa Harland was fantastic. I couldn't stop watching her. I couldn't. And I believed her. I'm excited to see anything she does now. I'm like, well, I know she was in Derry Girls, but absolute stunning talent, great stage talent, and great to see Woody Harrelson on the London stage, and great to see him really successfully mastering. I thought he looked very comfortable, very convincing. So that is on at the Riverside Studios out by Hammersmith on until early next year. But it's, what did you think of the ending? We can't really spoil the ending.
No, we can't talk about the ending.
But it was a bit bonkers.
Well, I will say that one critic that I read this morning was saying that there was vigorous overacting in the last bit.
Yes.
The last bit seems, in a way, unconnected to the rest.
I agree.
But I found it an extraordinarily good social satire with lots and lots of laughs, and I think 3 really excellent performances. So I would certainly recommend people to get along to the Riverside Studios at Hammersmith if they possibly can. I think you're not back next week, and so I just want to wish you a very happy Christmas.
Happy Christmas to
and
you
thank you for all that you've done on this
pleasure.
programme during the course of this year.
So much to come next year, so exciting times.
I can't wait to see you again.
Thank you.
Stefan Kyriazis. Well, there is more to come even today. I'll be hearing from across the channel the latest on the French crisis that's spilling out from the classrooms and onto the streets. And I shall indulge later in a few festive cocktails. That will all be after the news with Sam Francis.
Michael, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 12:32. The top story this hour. Pressure is mounting on Israel to call a ceasefire in Gaza. That comes after a joint article was published today by David Cameron and Germany's Foreign Affairs Minister. They warned that too many civilians have been killed and that it's time for a sustainable ceasefire. The intervention is a significant shift in the government's tone on the Israel war against Hamas terrorists. But the Foreign Secretary stopped short of calling for an immediate ceasefire. Lord Cameron's comments come after 2 women at a church in Gaza were killed after Israeli snipers opened fire. The head of the Roman Catholic Church in England and Wales condemned what he called the seemingly deliberate and callous killing of the woman and her daughter. It's understood the family of Liberal Democrat MP Layla Moran are among hundreds of civilians still trapped in the church. She says they could be days away from dying without access to food or water. Meanwhile, Israel's Prime Minister has suggested that fresh talks may be underway to secure the release of more hostages. Benjamin Netanyahu told reporters that the offensive in Gaza had been key to the release of hostages in November. Here in the UK, Rishi Sunak says hostile states are to blame for Britain's migration crisis as he works to bolster more support for what he's called radical measures to prevent illegal migration. The Prime Minister said opposing nations would drive people to our shores in the UK and destabilise the West. That's unless leaders crack down on the small boat crossings. It comes after Rishi Sunak travelled to Rome earlier this week to secure cooperation with Italy's right-wing Prime Minister. And Labour has accused the government of sending the NHS into winter naked, amid warnings of a crisis. The Shadow Health Secretary told GB News that part of the funding crisis facing the health system was due to excessive red tape. West Streeting promised that a Labour government would work to make GPs more accessible. And you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com. Now, though, more from Michael.
Welcome back. Earlier this week, teachers went on strike at a school near Paris, saying that they fear for their lives after Muslim pupils and parents voiced anger towards a teacher who had displayed a Renaissance painting of Diana and Action by Giuseppe Cesari that features nude women. Or does exposing pupils to great art now expose a teacher to terrible risk? After the recent murders of 2 teachers by jihadi terrorists, staff at the high school at Issou on the Seine, west of Paris, fear that they too could be attacked. Joining me now to discuss this is French correspondent for The Spectator magazine, Jonathan Miller. Jonathan, welcome to GB News. Very, very good to see you.
Michael.
This is a pretty sombre subject. Can you remind me, please, about the murders of 2 teachers in France?
Well, we've had 2 teachers murdered a couple of years ago. One was actually beheaded, and more recently another has been killed. There are hundreds of acts of violence in French schools every week. Teachers are leaving the profession because they're terrified. Teachers have been revered here in France. National education has been a fundamental bedrock of the French Republic. And teaching was once referred to as le plus beau métier du monde, the best job in the world. But it's not so much so anymore. There seem to be increasing numbers of students who are acting out violently, motivation very frequently inspired by jihad, take offense at discussion or the portrayal of things that offend them. And national education is in a certain sort of crisis here.
What do we know about the particular circumstances here? Do we know how and why this Action and Diana picture was shown, to whom it was shown, and what happened next? What do we know the details of this incident?
Well, the story is that this was a Renaissance painting. All I can say is when I was a schoolboy, if anybody had shown me this picture, I would have been probably saying, let's have more of this. But it turns out that this great work of European culture has been found offensive. And the consequence was, yet again, violence towards the teacher and threats. And there was a strike. The teachers here are feeling very depressed anyway. They're paid half as much here as they are in, for example, Germany. I have a friend in the village here, a village which I'm happy to say we enjoyed having you visit, who was hired as a teacher of English at a high school in Béziers. And she's told me her stories herself. She arrived at her class, there are 30 students. She says 4 of them were serious. The rest of them mainly spent their time on their mobile phones playing video games. And when she approached the principal of the school, the directrice of the school, and said, what should I do about this? The directrice said, do absolutely nothing. Because if you intervene or you discipline, you're likely to provoke something that won't be controllable. Now, she lasted 1 semester, 1 term at this school, and she's renounced teaching there again. Ironically, the reason she was hired is because her predecessor is on sick leave and has been on sick leave for 2 years as a result of stress. So you can see that being a teacher is no longer the most beautiful job in the world in France. It's a very risky profession, trying to impress on young people the virtues of the French Republic, these ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity upon which the Republic is founded.
Yeah, tell me a bit more about that, because It is a very French response that, apart from the physical threat to teachers here, that there is a threat to the fundamental values of the French Republic. Tell us a bit more about that, how people regard, for example, the importance of secularism within the education system.
Well, France has a policy called laïcité, which means it's non-secular, which means that while religion is permitted, it has no place in official life. But the boundary between laïcité and is being fractured, and this is to use perhaps an overused word, an existential threat to the French Republic. The idea of national education in France is that it breeds not only people competent in the French language and in mathematics and in those skills, but also it creates republicans. It creates people who have loyalty to the French state. And when you have a section of the population that feels no loyalty to the French state, indeed hostility, it makes the ideal of French education extremely weakened. And so we have a situation now where for years, France, you could say at any time for as long as I can remember, that France faces political, economic, and social crisis. But education seems to be something really, really fundamental. This idea that every student in France is learning the same curriculum, is singing the Marseillaise, has a love for what the country stands for, is being fundamentally undermined. This last term, Education Nationale began with a shortage of more than 3,000 teachers, a profession that was once a profession that would attract very bright, committed people is now considered too risky, because if teachers teach in a manner that is non-secular, they risk being attacked, insulted, or even, as we have seen, killed.
A sombre subject indeed, but thank you very much, Jonathan Miller, for joining us from France to tell us about the events there. In a few moments, I'll be indulging in some festive cocktails as the founder of the Cocktail Lab shares the ingredients needed to make your Christmas and New Year celebrations taste all the better.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Well, one way to spread Christmas cheer is through sharing a delicious cocktail with loved ones. I'm joined by the founder of the Cocktail Lab, Andrea Amoroso, who's going to share his festive tips. Andrea, how lovely to see you.
Great to meet you.
You brought an awful lot of kit with you.
It is, yeah.
Is there seasonality to cocktails?
Yes.
Yes. So what's seasonal for Christmas and New Year?
Right, so we have many cocktails this year created. Two of the most popular ones will be a cherry Christmas sour.
Yes.
And a lettuce low.
Shall we try the cherry Christmas sour?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
On it. So the first one will be a nice, lovely whiskey-based cocktail, and it's a shaken one.
You've done that before, I think.
Say quite a few times, yes. So we start with bourbon whiskey.
Now, where do you normally do this? Where do you hang out?
A mobile cocktail bar catering. So you call us, we'll get to you.
Really?
Yes.
Do you want to tell us how we get hold of you? You'll be on the internet as well, of course. Yes. OK. So the Cocktail Lab, is that right?
That's right.
Right, Cocktail Lab. So what do you put in there?
Oh, a couple of drops of cherry bitters. That's a really nice, lovely bitter. It makes the whole thing pretty much flavor and it gives a great texture to the cocktail. We're adding a bit of lemon juice in so that we can have... I've got one of your lovely mugs.
Yeah, a GB News mug. What's in there?
A little of egg white.
Oh, yes.
It gives lots of nice and full body and texture to the cocktail.
You have such elegant tools, if that's the expression. Look at this lovely long cocktail spoon there.
Looking after the details, that's what we like.
Of course.
A little touch of sugar syrup, a bit of lemon juice, and some fantastic Italian cherry liqueur.
Right. So that is the key ingredient. Well, they're all key ingredients, but that one sounds pretty important.
So first thing that we do would be dry shake, so that we mix all the ingredients properly together.
I always feel if I did that, they would burst apart in the middle and I'd be sprayed.
It has happened for the very first times. I mean, it did happen to me many times, actually, and all you need to do is just smile, and carry on. Yeah, that's what it usually is behind the bar.
So they've added the ice, so this is no longer going to be a dry shake.
Yes. So now we will give a proper shake.
And what has that achieved? That has cooled the liquid to exactly the right temperature.
Yes, that's right. Indeed.
Ooh, look at
a little double strain, so we make sure no ice.
So I believe that may be the pinkest drink that I've ever set eyes on.
Sure.
Oh, sorry, you haven't finished yet by any means.
And looking even nicer.
Yes, of course.
And lovely. Very good.
What's that, mint?
We'll get the mint, so push on the glass so it releases all the flavors from the mint. We'll add a little lovely red currant on. and we would dust it with a bit of icing sugar, so that make it look like Christmas one.
Oh,
there we go. It's
been snowed upon. Let me just hold that up so that may be admired. So I was saying this is a very, very pink drink, and I suspect it's going to be quite a sweet drink. How alcoholic is it?
Not too strong, but yes, indeed, it has 40 ml of whiskey in.
Ooh. I rather like that, actually, because although I thought it was going to be very sweet, it's got that sour taste to it, sort of whiskey sour taste. It's good.
That's right, indeed.
Ooh. Yeah, no, I go for that. Are you going to show me a second one?
Absolutely. Second one would be a Let It Slow, which is, of course, from the name, it would be a slow gin cocktail base.
Right.
So...
S-L-O-E, slow gin.
Slow gin, that's
made
right.
from slow.
And this is the right time to use the lovely equipment we mentioned.
I hoped you would.
That's great. So,
why is slow gin different from other gins?
Oh, it's made out of sloe, and the color tends to be purple.
Of course it does, because sloes are blackish.
Yes, it is less alcoholic than a normal gin.
Yeah.
The difference is because the gin is distilled, and the slow gin is an infused drink.
That kind of matches my jacket today, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. Yeah, indeed. Apricot brandy.
Yes.
A little touch.
Okay.
For the flavour.
That's going to make it a bit strong, I think.
Port. Some nice lovely port. Tiny touch.
But this is surely hangover territory, no?
It does. And a little bit of Angostura bitters, so they give a bit of bitterness as an aftertaste. All we need to do is now mix it. So this will be stirred, not shaken.
Right. In the words of James Bond, right?
That's right, indeed.
And this is going to be very, very short.
Oh no, it would be topped up with tonic.
You're going to top it up.
Yes. So the fizzy drink usually doesn't get shaken or stirred. It will be just poured.
Of course. So you do the stirring first, then we do the adding.
That's right, indeed.
Good.
Move this out of the way. Take this nice and lovely tool. Put it into the glass. This is pretty easy to be made at home.
And what fizz are you going to add?
Oh, just some nice, lovely slimline tonic.
Of course, because this is a time to be thinking about our figures, so some slimline tonic. Now, you're going to do beautiful things on the top like you did last time.
That's right.
How long have you been shaking, as they say?
Oh, all my life long.
Really?
As a mixologist. The cocktail lab has been going on for 6 years now. It's going really well. It's becoming more popular and popular, and we love it. Of course, it's not just me. I have to thank a massive and great team that we have behind.
Have you finished with that?
That's all done for you.
OK, great.
I'm ready to go. Let me know what you think.
Well, you know, I like it, but it is it's a good deal sweeter than that one. So personally, I go for the sourer and shorter one. But Andrea, they're both great. Hello.
Hello. Lingering by the Christmas tree.
Dawn Neeson is
determined to out-jacket you.
Yes,
I think I might have done it today. What do you
certainly
reckon?
have. Do you want a sip of anything? Have you been watching what Andrea's been up to here?
Yes, I have. I was very impressed, actually. Yeah, I've been shaking for a long time as well, evidently. I'm not surprised working with this one.
Now,
OK, go on.
What's on your show?
Right, on my show, we've got a cracking show, a sparkling show, you could say,
yes,
coming up. We have got, she says, checking her notes, we have got a great panel. We have got our Dennis McShane coming on and Emma Webb. So, good panel.
Dennis and I go back a long way.
Yes, exactly, yes. So he might have mentioned that. We're talking about Rishi Sunak's chopper, Gary Lineker's baubles, what to do with mistletoe this Christmas and why you do it, more importantly, and some scurry funge.
OK, so
why don't you...
Why do we do what we do with mistletoe?
You're going to have to watch and find out. I'm not telling you now.
I'm going to have to watch the show. And did you say Rishi Sunak's chopper? Is that a reference to a helicopter?
It might be. You'll have to watch and find out, won't you, Michael?
Right,
I'm not giving anything away. It's going to be a cracking show. So much better than yours, obviously. But you have alcohol.
We have had a cracking show, and I really want to thank everyone who's been on the show today. I'm always so grateful to people who come in on a Sunday. as you see, Dawn Neeson will be taking over in just a moment. I'm going to be back here on Christmas Eve, and I'm very much looking forward to the Christmas Eve show. But all of you surely are beginning your festivities now, and so this is an opportunity for me to wish you the very happiest start to your festive season. And thanks to Andrea and his magnificent shaking, I'm able to say to all of you, cheers.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, good afternoon. I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. It's quite a windy day out there for many of us. We've seen gusts of 50 to 60 miles per hour in places, so do take care because some travel disruption is possible. The persistent rain that we have seen across western Scotland this weekend is slowly going to be easing out as we head into this evening and overnight, but it does mean it's going to be pushing its way southwards into Northern Ireland, northwest England, western Wales. Quite a damp night here. Far southeast of England holding on to some drier conditions, but still fairly mild and cloudy here. Temperatures for most of us holding up between 9 and 11 degrees Celsius. As we head into Monday, then it's looking like quite a grey, drab, damp day for the vast majority of us. Particularly western areas will see outbreaks of rain. Further towards the east, it will be slightly lighter and patchier. And actually some brighter conditions should push their way into Scotland and Northern Ireland as we head into the afternoon. The winds will ease down here a touch, but further showers pushing into the far northwest of Scotland later on as well. Temperatures again fairly above average for the time of year, ranging between 10 and 13 degrees Celsius. Into Tuesday, we've got this next set of fronts that are going to start pushing their way in across the south of the UK, and so it's England and Wales are going to bear the brunt of the rainfall as we head into the day here. Quite a wet rush hour period to start off the day. Quite a lot of spray on roads is certainly possible. It will still be very blustery as all of this rain pushes its way off. Some brighter spells for Scotland, Northern Ireland, still with a scattering of showers, though some of those will be wintry over the higher ground, and it's that theme of showers that will persist as we head throughout the rest of the week. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7.